Hey there, everyone. We are getting live here in a few seconds. Just want to make sure. Oh, I'm not using the right mic. Look at that. Okay, hopefully now I am on Yeti instead of on my Mac mic. So that should hopefully be better. Let me know if it's terrible. I hope everyone's doing well today. Today we're going to talk about some of the challenges consultants face. Let me know if anyone has any immediate questions, but we'll kind of get started there. I'll give a second for everyone to kind of join in. All right. So we're just going to kind of start this pretty much high level. What challenges do most consultants face, or will you face as a consultant? And I think that the first and the biggest one that everyone faces when they're like, "Oh, I want to do consulting," or even if it's like, "I want to start a startup." The big thing is, where are people that are willing to pay for that service or product, right? Your clients, your customers. Where are you going to find them? Or how are they going to find you? Is probably another way of thinking about it. I think that's one of the big challenges a lot of people face. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Finding a niche can also be an interesting challenge. Everyone says get a niche down, but it can be very nerve-wracking because I think everyone really wants to ensure that they're maximizing and optimizing, the amount of money they can make, but also, there's a lot of things we're all interested in. So it feels like sometimes you limit yourself by finding a niche and maybe finding a niche too early. I think another problem is like finding constant clients, right? Like you're often trying to balance getting new clients while doing your old work. So those two bullet points kind of go together, like balancing work with current clients and finding new clients and making sure you keep this constant stream, I think is often a challenge. So I think that's kind of the big challenges that I wanted to focus on and discussing today. So just like starting with like methods of landing clients, there's a ton. I've only put in a few here, which I just realized have some interesting font differences. But you've got things like content marketing, webinars and workshops, networking and partnerships, social media, and community engagement. Let me see. I feel like that was not very zoomed in. I'm gonna zoom into this chart. This was like a chart that I found where someone did a survey in terms of like where do their coaching clients come from. So again, they had like social media, paid advertising, public speaking, content marketing. I think the thing you see here, and I think this is kind of pretty consistent with a lot of people that I've worked with, is things like word of mouth, professional referrals, and social media tend to be the biggest places content or clients tend to come from. I know this is coaching, but I find this at least true in my space. Is I get a lot from my content, and then after you get a lot from your content, you get a lot from like professional referrals and word of mouth. And professional referrals has a lot kind of nested in there. You're going to likely have things like vendors. So if you partner with vendors, they're likely going to send you some clients. If you partner with other consultants, they'll likely send you some clients. So there's a lot of reasons to like partner with other, vendors, consultants, and other individuals that can help you out. Like with consultants, the benefit could be like, hey, I'm a data analytics consultant. You're maybe a Salesforce consultant. It might make sense that we partner because there's some level that we can kind of meet each other in the middle. But I also think, things like public speaking is another great place to kind of like at least start conversations, like meetups, public speaking, things like that is also a place that I've started to land clients. So I think those are all great methods. And honestly, there's like a whole list of them. I talk about a lot of them in the Technical Freelancer Academy, which is linked below. If you want to like go through more and more in depth, we're going to talk about a few today. But if you want to learn more about, methods of finding clients, that's kind of a great way to do it. Terms you should know as you're trying to like find clients that I think are just key and good to understand. Things like buying persona. I think it's important to understand who you're trying to sell to, right? Like there's some people call it like a target persona, buying persona. Generally, people have this notion of like a fictional character or semi-fictional character. Like some people will even name them like Startup Steve. That you try to outline who this individual is that you're targeting with your content, with your marketing, whatever it might be, so that you start really trying to tailor it towards that specific individual. You understand who they are, what problems they face, not just the problems that they're going to pay you for, but all of their, as many of their problems as you can list, right? Okay, they're trying to grow, they're trying to deal with, basic metrics, really trying to understand who it is so that as you're creating content, you really start focusing it on them. Also, inbound marketing is a good term to know. There's things like outbound and inbound. It just refers to the different ways that people get clients to find you. Inbound is the method of essentially people come to you, right? Outbound is you kind of really putting out the feelers and trying to reach out to, cold DMs, things like that. Inbound, which is the thing that I tend to do really well, is the method where you create a ton of content or you put yourself out there enough to where people just start reaching out to you. And then sales funnel, and it could be sales funnel, but we're also going to talk about kind of a content funnel or marketing funnel, where basically how do people go from like being aware that you exist to eventually purchasing whatever it is that you're offering. Again, that could be a startup, that could be your consulting service. For me, again, it's consulting, but these are all great to understand just so you can kind of fit them mentally, right? I'm sure some people get this, that in terms of like you've probably done something similar as some of these things, but never really put terms to maybe processes or setups. So just good things to know. And generally, I say like, setting up that buying persona is kind of the first step before even, going back to the different methods before picking these methods. Because when you start doing things like webinars and networking and content marketing, if you don't know what their problems are, it's just harder to kind of, I think, go forward because you're going to say you can solve every problem, but you want to focus in on a specific set. So where do you start? Generally, again, before picking a tactic, I'd say define who you're selling to. Who is it? Is it a VP of marketing? Is it a VP of data? A CEO? Try to figure out that person, because whatever you're writing, whatever content you're putting out, is going to go to that person, and you want it to really speak to them, right? You want them to understand that, hey, whoever it is will solve my problems, right? Like that's your goal. You want to be able to say, what problems does this person have, and how do you solve them, right? Like there's little templates you can find on like how to find a target persona or how to like write out a target persona, and you want to kind of write that out. Like what problems do they have? What are their biggest challenges? And then you can kind of like write that out. How can you help answer those problems, right? And you can pick a few of those problems and target those. Like that's really what we're going to talk about here in the content marketing section here shortly. But that's really the way I'd go. Instead of like trying to just answer everyone's problems, not really having a clear strategy, because I think that's what happens with a lot of content that I see from, especially startups. I think they'll have content everywhere, but it really doesn't sell to anything. It's just, hey, we saw our competitor has this content, so we need to have this content. So there really needs to be a strategy. And I think that's something that's very helpful. Someone just asked, did you set up a SWOT analysis and business plan together while also putting together a target persona and putting together your marketing? No, I didn't really do a SWOT analysis or business plan, not for consulting, right? Because consulting, I think you should kind of understand what you're going to do, and the different skills you have, but I don't think you need to necessarily have this like perfect business plan to go forward, right? Like you have skills. Are people willing to pay for those skills? That's kind of what I'd imagine, at least at the baseline you should do. If you want to go through the extra steps after that to list out weakness and opportunities and threats, that's fine. But I think at the baseline, when you're just starting to consult, I think it's important to see like, hey, are people willing to even pay for what I have, right? And then that's going to be the start of your kind of business. Maybe as you go further along, it can make sense to do SWOT analysis, right? It's like if you're trying to go into maybe a different market, or maybe as you're trying to grow, right? Like if there's like, hey, we want to grow, I think that's maybe where SWOT analysis makes sense. Early on, it probably makes a little less sense. It's a fun exercise, I guess. So I really wanted to dig in on content marketing for today. I think that's always an interesting space because it is arguably in some ways easy, right? Like it's easy to put out videos. It's easy to essentially just write content, but that in other ways makes it very hard because it means everyone does it, and so you have to stand out and you have to answer the right questions. Let me see what questions people have here. I've got some other questions, and I'll answer them here. And I'm just looking at them. Interesting. That's interesting. Good questions. I will answer them here shortly. All right. So again, I like thinking about different stages of the funnel as I'm creating content. So some people have like a fifth stage of their funnel. You can have as many as you want, essentially, right? Awareness, interest, desire, action. That's just kind of the way I've broken it down. When I start creating content, again, step one, figure out who your buying persona is, right? Like, who is this person? Why would they need my services? Once you've kind of done that, you can start thinking, okay, now that we kind of know who this person is, how do we create content for their journey, right? Like, if they were, dealing with a specific problem, the example I often hear is like, if someone's about to get hearing aids, or starting to lose their hearing, and eventually you're a hearing aid company, you want to sell to them. They're not going to Google what's the best brand of hearing aid first, right? Like, as they're going through the journey, right? Like, sadly, like, they're going to start losing their hearing, and so they're going to start Googling things about that. Like, why can't I hear certain letters? Because that's generally what happens first, is you lose certain letters, and then you kind of go from there. It's just an easy example, but airflow is another example that I have, or trying to like hit initial awareness is what I usually try to do with like basic content, right? Like, I think about my target audience as someone who's like, hey, they're probably trying to make decisions on what products to use. Like, what is airflow? They may be just starting their journey, and like, is airflow a good solution, or is SSAS a good solution? They're trying to pick these tools, or maybe they're trying to find alternatives. Like, maybe they're currently using SSAS and now they're trying to find a new solution. And I know that that'll probably be some of the first stuff they look up, is like, well, what are alternatives? So that's where I want to be, when I first get kind of that awareness, that thought leadership. And then as they go deeper on their journey, I might reference things. I have this like common pitfalls for deploying Airflow kind of article. And I have that because I know it's like, hey, after you're like, hey, we want to use Airflow, you might start looking into the problems that Airflow has and the pros and cons. So that's why I have, content in that space. And then, desire and action tends to be more where it's like, hey, you have content that's specifically focused on like, this is exactly what I do, right? Like, I do Airflow services. I'm just making sure I keep track of questions. I'm going to see how they Discord. Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. So that's kind of the way I look at that. Another way you can kind of go through this process that I like to think about is, you can kind of create yourself a little template here, and then for every layer, you see awareness, interest, desire, etc. You end up having topics that you kind of write down. So again, what is airflow? What is etc. If there are any objections you think a client would have at this point to your service, and then also creating some sort of CTA that matches where they're at. The matches is kind of interesting because, at awareness, they maybe don't want to set up a 30-minute call with you, right? Because they're just getting started. Um, but instead, you could have some other thing here with this CTA, where maybe if it was that Airflow example, you could give them like a guide for setting up Airflow, or how to set up Airflow at scale, or something like that here as a CTA. And then, either look to get their email or something like that there, because it's a little more low commitment. They don't have to like set up a whole meeting with you, which is a little more high risk. And as you go down, you kind of think about more topics, more objections, more CTAs that fit that current stage as you're kind of creating this content, and trying to trying to get them to understand who you are, what your services are. Um, I think one of the big things that I often find when people go down this space is that their content tends to be really about them. Like, especially when it comes to startups, but consultants too, is, you talk about the features, you talk about like what skills you have, when you really need to be talking about, how do you solve problems for this client, right? I like this quote, don't interrupt what your buyer wants to consume, be what they want to consume. So if you've ever seen HubSpot, they just have content every time on like basic things. They always have it. They had a good strategy on how they set that up. And so I think that's really part of it, is like, as you're creating this content, you shouldn't be trying to sell to them immediately. Your goal should be like, hey, I just want to be the answer, right? Like, it isn't just about like my product. I want to be where my clients is going. I want to be where my persona is going to look for problems. I want to be the first thing that they see. And so I think that's an important thing, is you're trying to create this content, trying to build this funnel to think about. So how do you pick your topics, right? So we've kind of talked about the funnel, which is the higher level. view of this. But how do you pick your topics? And so I think step one, think back to that persona and their problems. I think that's the biggest thing. And if you have friends that happen to be that persona, or you have someone in your network, go and talk to them and try to figure out what their problems are. Right. Um, Try to figure out what they might be researching. You can go like on SEM Rush. So that's a great way to like figure out what are the keywords that you think people are looking up. Are they looking up what is Airflow? Are they looking up what is a data warehouse early on, or should I use a data warehouse? Try to figure out what those are. And then write a list of like 5 or 10 article titles you think help answer those problems in general, right? I've given you a few examples here, like alternatives to Snowflake, or it's kind of a popular one. What is articles is kind of a solid one just to get started, especially if you make like a really large piece, and we'll talk about that later. But like being kind of that keystone piece is generally very, very helpful. Or like you can do like your basic how-to, but it needs to be how-tos around things that people are going to look up. I often see this with, again, startups, but people maybe who work with startups, maybe consultants who work with startups have the same problem. If no one knows that your product exists, and then you say like how to do something with your product, no one's looking that up. Especially if you've only just started. Snowflake and Databricks have kind of a cheat code at this point because they've built up brand awareness. They've also become part of careers for engineers, so people are going to look up things like how to use or how to set up these products by name. But your product or your service is not going to have that happen, right? So instead, you need to kind of be more broad in general. You can also focus on specific problems, like the how to migrate from Snowflake to Databricks. That tends to be deeper in the funnel, but I think it's a good plan to kind of think about that as well. And feel free to keep asking questions. I'll answer them here in a second as well. I'll take a moment to pause. So as you kind of pick these pieces of content and what you're going to write, again, I really think you should focus on things that are commonly searched, or at the very least, maybe are a blue ocean. I like that as well. So either commonly searched or don't have any articles around, but have some search around them, right? It's going to be hard to win what is DBT if everyone has a DBT article, and also because DBT has different terms as well. But you can kind of use SEM Rush to figure out what topics are open, and maybe what topics don't have a ton of competition, and you can try to compete in those as well. I also like the idea of testing things out, like on LinkedIn. You don't have to commit to writing a 2,000 word article immediately, but instead you can kind of test ideas out, see if people respond to them on LinkedIn, and then you can commit more to a longer article. When you write that article, especially your first article, like I'm calling this post an anchor article, right? It should be like over 2,000 words in general. It tends to be good to have something that like Google will rank highly. If you're looking to advise beginners who want to start a career, and could be provide a playbook to help them get started. I don't know if I'll have to check up that quote here in a second if that's a question or not. But yeah, so essentially, you've got 2,000 plus words. That's usually the goal initially, right? Just because that tends to rank highly on Google. I use I think actually I'm curious. I'm gonna go check if this is still the case right now. Alternatives to DBT. I spelled alternatives incorrectly. So if we look up alternatives to DBT, yeah. So if you look up alternatives to DBT, other than Reddit, and then obviously the paid solutions, Jeff, actually don't know how to say Jeff's last name. Jeff, who's of Green Mountain Data Solutions, is actually the first article that comes out. We actually worked on that, not so much together. I just kind of gave him a little bit of coaching through the course, but he wrote it pretty much. And that I think is a great example of like how you can get to like number one. And now when people look up alternatives to DBT, he's kind of the first solution that comes up. And he actually even beats the community forum for DBT and a couple others there, including like Restack and a couple others like Ascend. So I think that's kind of cool. Again, minus Reddit, which is, you're not going to win that unless you put your own content there as well on Reddit. All right. I'm gonna take a quick pause here, see some questions. All right. What's your approach when outreaching and cold calling these potential target customers? I actually don't do a lot of cold calling and outreaching. And really, I do a lot of like inbound leads. Right. To me, it's either inbound leads or warm leads. Especially on LinkedIn, like everyone has a million people reaching out to them. I have so many people, especially from consultants, other consultancies, who are like, I can help you get more clients or something like that. And I ignore most of them. Like you would have to have a very good proposition where like you're paying me practically, or you already have a client that I'm gonna want to work with that I am gonna like answer that. I have too much to deal with. So in general, I think, either inbound or making sure you have a warm lead. If you are going to go the outreach method, make sure you have some level of warm lead or know who you're targeting. You have to be very, very, you can't just randomly target people. You have to constantly know exactly who you're targeting and what their problems are. That's generally what I hear from salespeople. And you can't just email them once and think it's going to happen. You have to keep emailing them over and over again. So that's generally there. Let's see. Can we talk about when the roles are reversed and you need to inform a client about the problems they need to solve? For example, when they are bringing you in to oversee an overhaul of a backend. I mean, that's a little different, I guess, because at that point they've already brought you in. So more than likely, like that's part of the process, right? Like you have to help them understand what needs to happen. Generally, the way I usually kind of like win over or influence people are a couple ways. One, I have proof of concept. Like I'll be like, hey, look, I've already built something that you need. Because I had a client, for example, that wanted to build something very complex in a complex method where they wanted to build everything from scratch. And I'm like, hey, I've already built what you need, or at least like the prototype, in a day. And instead of having, it's going to take you 3 months and $60,000 to go the other direction, like these are your two options really. So, that's one way, is just have a proof of concept, because that's always going to win. Two, they're hiring you to be the consultant. So if you think that, there needs to be an overhaul of the back end, you have to prove it, right? Like obviously, like I'll usually go through, like I have an audit kind of form when I go through like more complex, like audits, not more complex, just audits, just go through an audit. And, part of it, I'll list out like problems or things that need to happen, right? And one of the things might be like what you're saying, like, oh, you need to overhaul your back end, right? And I'll say like, what the priority is, like, what's the lift on this, like, how long will it take, and why? Like, okay, well, why am I saying this, and giving clear reasons. So I think, as long as you give clear reasons and backing, people are usually pretty happy. Okay, so this is someone doing not question. Thank you. Let's see. I was trying to figure out, if you're looking to advise beginners who want to start a career in data consultancy, where should you begin? Could you provide a playbook to help them get started? I'm curious if you're asking this about me. I do have like a 30-day checklist. So that's one way that I, for example, have put out content in that space. I have a 30-day checklist that kind of helps people kind of get started initially, and then also the course. But 30-day checklist is free, so you can just do that. Which platform is best for content marketing? Does it make sense to post on multiple platforms? That's a great question. So my view on different platforms. I should actually have a post about that, or not a post, but one of the slides should be about that. So my view on different platforms. One, you should always have a blog. You should have your own blog. You should own your own property, essentially. It's like owning property. You should have a blog. The problem is, unless you have your blog, is how do you get people to go there? So you do need to go, I think, on different sites to actually get some SEO initially. So Medium, I have mixed feelings about Medium, mostly because, if your goal is to get 1,000 followers on Medium, or 10,000 followers, 100,000, it doesn't really matter, right? Medium doesn't give you a benefit for having lots of followers. If you write content that no one wants to read, no one will read it. And that's just how it's going to go. So that's not great. But on the flip side, in terms of like SEO, Medium can be a great place. Medium is a good place to build SEO. It's a good place that traffic exists, right? Like people go there. That people go there. So even if you can get an article that does well once or twice, it can start winning you over, some SEO. It can start winning you over some initial traffic to your blog. Again, you should always go back to your blog. Substack's another one, obviously. The challenge there is that you kind of have a cold start problem. I think they're trying to figure that out by adding in recommendations and adding in kind of the social media aspect where you can start sharing. But you still need people to kind of like get there and start giving you emails or following you. So that tends to be the challenge there. Eventually, you do want to have somewhere that you're gathering emails, but Substack, that's the challenge. So it's great. You get emails, so you don't have to worry about an algorithm, but you are balancing this fact that you don't have anyone coming to your content initially. And then, yeah, you should have your own blog because, again, own property. You don't need to do all of them all the time. I use Medium occasionally still, but what I think eventually needs to happen is that your blog needs to be your main place. And then if you have a good newsletter following, you can make that, more of a mainstay. But overall, I think your blog needs to be the main goal. If you have, in terms of different platforms and posting, I'll maybe adjust my blogs a little bit and post on multiple platforms. I've never felt like I got dinged for posting the same thing on multiple platforms. In fact, I remember this one time when I posted from one platform to another, from Medium to dev.to, which I haven't posted on dev.to forever. Like, I still got a ton of views on an article that had gotten a ton of views on Medium because people hadn't seen it. And the truth is, like, there's tons of audiences that have not seen your content, and that reposting is not the end of the world. But maybe make it a little bit a small change there. All right. So just some other types of articles. So the last article was more of like this anchor article. It's like 2,000 words. It's a big thing. It's about really getting attention. Again, you can look up alternatives to DBT, and you should find Green Mountain Data Solutions from Jeff, who kind of wrote his kind of mainstay piece there. But there are other types of articles, right? How-tos is a great one. How to do something, how to use something. Use cases is always great. Listicles, right? Like 10 great DBT tool or 10 great DBT tests, maybe, or something, or 10 great ETL tools. These are all great because honestly, most of them are written by the company they're trying to sell anyway. So you might as well be a little more of a non-biased opinion there. And then I like challenges too, like challenge type articles, like challenges you'll face or common pitfalls or things of that nature. So these are all great kind of article themes that you can kind of go on as you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I write? What's next? You can literally take Airflow and write, 4 articles from this alone. How to do something in Airflow, Airflow use cases, 7 operators or DAGs or something, 7 operators you can use or something from Airflow, and common challenges of Airflow. I did have a post on this. Look at that. I didn't realize that. I forgot I had this. So yeah, once you're done, I guess this is kind of not really that. Once you're done, you're not done. People need to find your content. And I often find that content is not that different than selling a product. You have to find distribution, right? Social media, right? Like LinkedIn and things like that. You're gonna have to post your blog there to get some traction. Medium, again, you can kind of use to like repost or maybe post initially because that will send people back to your blog. Reddit, I always say be careful. People on Reddit don't really like marketing, so make sure whatever you're putting on Reddit is super helpful because they do like helpful things. They don't like being sold to. They don't like things that are clearly marketing, and if they feel that, that's generally how they feel. Other people's blogs, of course. Make sure that if you can have friends or something like that, try to get your blogs linked there, and then also make sure you're linking your articles to your own blog, right? Like if you've got a massive article that you've spent a lot of time on, that's 3,000 words, that's getting tons of traction, make sure it's attached to other articles that you have, so that those ones get at least a little bit funneled to them, and maybe take people deeper down into the funnel of what you have to offer. So that's the thing. All right, so finding your niche. So I kind of like putting up these priorities because I think a lot of people when they first start, their questions often like how much do I price? Maybe that's not their first question, but it's like somewhere in their second or third question. You're not even on that problem yet. I think overall, your first problem is generally finding your niche, right? Because if you don't find your niche, you're gonna have a hard time finding clients. And if you can't find clients, you're gonna have a hard time learning how to deliver to them. And if you don't know what people find valuable, it's gonna be hard to figure out what price should be, right? So that's why I often say find your niche first. You don't have to like find a perfect niche. I think that's the one thing is like just start to kind of define it, right? At least a little bit. It doesn't have to be this super narrow thing. Be like, hey, I'm a data engineer that likes using certain tools, and I'll just write on those tools. That's fine to start because eventually you'll start digging into it and finding what people actually want. For example, I for the last, I think, 6 months or year, I was telling people, hey, you should probably write on Databricks, because Databricks right now is growing rapidly, right? Like I think just the end of last year it grew 50%, meaning there's a lot of market for people who need help with Databricks. And I saw that with my content myself, like with my video that was doing really well, that happened to be about Databricks as well. And I think that's what kind of got me digging into that topic. Where it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of people who are into Databricks and want help there. So just finding something there, because then you can know what content to put out. Okay, so when you're finding your niche, here's just a few ideas, just to give you some tips. One, use your network. Before you quit your job, go talk to a bunch of people. Go talk to people who you either know or need your services, or maybe know of people who need your services. Talk to a bunch of people. Ask them, hey, what's useful to know. um uh Assess kind of your skills and passions, right? Like that's the whole, like like people often put those like three circles together. Like, what do people want? What is the market demand? What are you good at, and what are you passionate about? Right? Figure out what those are, write those down, and figure out, hey, is there something that the market wants? Right? Like based off the conversations that you've just had with people, do any of these things line up? Like are the skills that I have actually worth what people want? Right? And so I think a lot of it's going to be about you doing some research, testing things, getting feedback. Again, I love doing LinkedIn for that. Like start posting things, start offering like small scale projects for people, see what people are willing to pay for. You don't have to commit 100% into a certain direction. I honestly started going down like the data science route initially, and then eventually was like, I just started writing more about data engineering and found more and more work in that space. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll do 100% data engineering and not just try to dig too much into something that I'm not getting as much traction for. So really try to find what people aren't giving, because there's plenty of people who want certain projects, and write broadly. But if you can find little niches, maybe if it's even as deep and specific as like healthcare fraud detection or financial fraud detection, that's always kind of a great way to think about what you should be doing and what you should be offering when you think about finding a niche. Also, feel free to keep asking questions. I'll get back there here shortly. Okay. Just some thoughts on the niche. Perfect is the enemy of good. I think that's always the case, right? Like, I think some people spend so much time doing things like over analyzing what they do. Like, yeah, you should have a general target persona, but you don't need to spend 3 months preparing your target persona. Um, SWOT analysis, that's fine, but if you spend 3 months doing a SWOT analysis and then you finally execute, right? Like at a certain point, you just got to start going, especially early on in your career or early on in your company, right? You have no idea what's going to work, and you need to just be experimenting on different ideas. So don't spend so much time trying to find this perfect niche that you don't actually start, consulting and start doing the work, because that will really tell you what people want, right? Like, don't if you spend too much time trying to be having a perfect niche, you probably will not get anywhere fast enough. The market will tell you kind of what they want. I think it's always kind of interesting. I didn't realize that airflow was kind of an interesting space worth selling into until I started writing more content out there and putting out content. And I think I could point to like $500,000 of sales that have come through a lot of my airflow content alone. And that was due to and that was kind of an accident. Like I think I put out one of the videos and I was like, oh, okay. I got like 2 different people who reached out to me for this video alone. And it doesn't have a lot of views, but there are people who are looking at this problem. And so I started kind of double downing on that specific content because I was like, okay, this seems to be, what people want to see. So, the market will kind of tell you, right? Like you'll put out content, and then if you can occasionally ask people where they came from or why they came to you or things like that, that's generally very helpful. And starting out broad is okay. I referenced this earlier. It's like you don't have to immediately focus on a very tiny niche. You will slowly. It's better if you want to start increasing revenue and increasing prices and increasing the value you offer to people. That's great. But starting out broad's okay, because you'll figure out kind of what's in between that. Let's see. Oh, this is interesting. Is it better to optimize your content for people aesthetics or bot parsing? Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about it that deeply. I will generally try to make things easy to read. There are some things like I use, what is it? Is it Yoast SEO, which is like I think what most people use, just to try to make sure that like I am following decent practices for people to read. Like it'll be like, oh, try to break up your content with like 300 word, like sections. Again, like I have a few things like try to have 2,000 words plus, especially if you're trying to get like kind of your anchor pieces. The other, not everything has to be that, but like your anchor pieces in particular, which I guess is kind of tuning towards the bot. But I also get frustrated when I go onto a website and it feels like that's all they did, right? Like there are clearly websites out there that like they just like put in, like if you look up like what is a data warehouse, I know that there's a few people I've looked into where it's like their content is clearly just like we just SEO'd the crap out of this, right? We put like this is like a 5,000 word blog. Half of it's useless to me, or if not more, right? Like it's just like extra content and extra fill to like make the bot happy. And I don't like that. But maybe I'm a little pickier because I know that that's what they're doing, and maybe other people don't care. But it doesn't feel pleasant because I have to go through so much just to find my answer, whatever the answer is, whenever I go to those sites. So. That's just my feeling. And that's how I generally see that. There's a community. The TFA is kind of one of them. We have a community when people join the course. The people kind of come in and talk about things. Let's see. Are there any benefits for people who want to stay a generalist? I'm trying to think. I mean, the benefit is like you can arguably answer more problems, and like that means maybe there's more work for you. But I think on the flip side, like you might find a challenge in terms of like how much you can charge, right? Like if you don't answer a specific problem, and then you don't know the value of it, and if you don't know the value of it, it's hard to like price correctly. Um, and people will probably look for an expert sometimes. Like people always look for generalists sometimes because maybe they're looking for a cheaper option, and they're like, "Wow, the expert said it's going to be $300,000. They're a cheaper option." And then they're like, okay, we found a generalist who is cheaper. Um, I don't think it's bad, but I think that's pros and cons, I guess. So that's kind of my tips on finding a niche. Really, really research it, dig down, figure out what you're good at, figure out what you want to do. Right? Like, hey, like imagine this is what you're going to do for the next 5 years. So is that what you want to do? Figure out the skills you have, figure out the skills you want. Really, really try to align that. And again, I always say, perfect is the enemy of good. Don't spend so much time finding a niche that you don't ever get out of that. All right, I did want to say something about finding balance because it feels like I think this is always a hard thing if you're your own consultant, is finding balance, right? I mean, obviously in this meme, it's about like trying to find time to go to the gym and do all this stuff. But when you're your own consultant, I think one of the big challenges is you try to find balance in terms of like, oh, I need to find new clients. I need to land or I need to work with the clients I have. I need to deliver to them. I need to be marketing. I need to be doing so many activities. And so that there is this need to find balance. I think the best way, if you can do it, is to try to either set up a certain time of day for certain activities or certain days for certain activities, is generally what I tell people, right? Hey, maybe, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for you is marketing stuff. You're just going to be doing marketing. You're going to be writing content. You're going to be doing things in that space, right? You don't have to get things completely done, but in that 2 hours, right? Like that's what you should be doing. That way you don't feel like, you have to like, it never ends. But also you can then have time slotted for when work is. And that just gives you, I think, better balance. Like you have to do it all. Like that's the truth. Like if you're not spending some time doing content or whatever your sales motions are, you're not going to have new clients in a few months. And that's what's going to happen. So you do need to put some effort into it. Maybe you put less. I think that's the one thing I've seen is like maybe people like you pull off a little bit when you have, 4 clients, you're working all the time. You just don't have time to do it. So maybe now you're doing 30 minutes or an hour every other day. And if you have enough content out there, especially, it might be better or it might be fine that you don't have to like always constantly be just chugging forward, right? And instead, you can, maybe just do 30 minutes every other day just to maybe put out a new LinkedIn post or to work on an article that will go out once a week or once a month because you already have enough other content to kind of balance out. But that's generally what I'd recommend is like you really need to just spend time finding balance. Let's see, what's this one saying? It's hard to say no to a contract today if you don't know if there's a contract. It will be another contract tomorrow. This part's true. I mean, I think that's kind of part of the generalist uh, comment, I imagine. It's why I think a lot of people will sometimes stay generalists, because it's like, well, I got new work today, might as well, and that's fine. Again, like it gives you a broader amount of work. Um, what I think the eventual goal is to try to find some balance where, um, if you don't have work right now, maybe for the next month, that hopefully you've made so much money in the other months, you can kind of enjoy that time off, right? That's kind of what I've tried to get more accustomed to. Is like I haven't had any like no month or no work months, but every once in a while I'll have a slow month. And it's like just learning to enjoy that. Because like there will be months on the flip side where it's like I'm super busy anyways. And learning to like kind of try to push out work a little more. Occasionally it's like if I do have a busy set of months, I'll try to push out work more, where it's like, hey, like, yeah, I'd love to work with you all. How about we try working together in a month and a half? Like I'm really busy right now and I want to do a great job for you. And that tends to even out some of the like ebbs and flows that are natural, I think, a little bit to consulting. Um, but yeah, like my goal is generally to try to make sure I'm working on the right projects so that when the wrong projects come to me, and that I can't price as well, or I don't think I'm going to do as well, I can say no to them more often. But yeah, it definitely is hard. I won't sit here and pretend that it's easy to say no when you're like, well, this people are willing to pay me, they want to work with me. So finding that ability to say no, is hard. And sometimes I definitely will say I get a bit more when I say yes to things I know I should say no to than I don't. So, making sure that you say yes to the right things is important, but it is hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. Also, feel free to ask questions. I think I'm pretty much wrapped up here on this. Yep, this is just a thank you. So, feel free to ask some questions, guys, if you have any questions on consulting or how to get started. Again, I do have what I'm calling the TFA, the Technical Freelancer Academy, is linked below. So if you want to learn more, that's great. If not, I have a ton of content here, that you can honestly check out for free on consulting. And I should also have a 30-day checklist if you just want to start your own consulting company. Like, check this out here. So if anyone needs this 30-day checklist, it's free. You can just look at it. It just gives you some ideas. I think, actually, I do call it the one thing that is paid here, I think. So other than that, it should mostly be free stuff that you can kind of use to just get started on your own journey here with consulting. Let's see. How do you manage follow-up projects from existing clients? I guess I'm curious what this is asking. Like, my guess is you're asking, do I like reach out to people, or how do I set up the next phase? Generally, I'm pretty clear up front if a project is like going to be phased, or like, this could be the initial phase. This is what I envision people. I try always, to lack of a better term, always be selling, right? Like you're always kind of selling the next project to a degree. Always focus on the current project, but always make sure there's a vision for the bigger project. It might not happen, but always make sure it's like, hey, yeah, and like, this is the current project. Going forward, we could also do all this other stuff, and making sure that they're constantly understanding what else you believe you can offer them, right? I don't oversell, but I always try to make sure that I'm like clear that like, hey, in the next phase, we could do this other thing, even if there's in the next phase that you've talked about, but just so that they're constantly aware that there is something more that you offer. Because if you don't make it clear that you offer more, they might just think, hey, this person does this one little box and that's it. So I think that's important. Let's see. Thanks, I've been following along. Career kind of. Any words of wisdom on the distinction between consulting and contracting? Yeah, so consulting and contracting, right? I think I had this in one of my prior lives that I did. Really, consulting, and the way that people often explain it is that consulting is kind of being a brain more than it is a pair of hands. Contracting is very much a pair of hands. So, someone is out of. I feel like there's someone is like needs more time, right? Like they're like, hey, we don't have enough time in terms of like people time, so we're going to hire a bunch of contractors to do this work. And so, that's one thing that I think I often see is that contracting is often like, hey, we just need flex work, right? Whereas consultants come in and like, hey, we need to pay you for your brain, right? Like, hey, we need you to see around corners. Like that's honestly the conversations I often have. It's like they're like, hey, we're paying you because we want to know what other people are doing. We want to know how other people are setting up their data infrastructure. We want to know if we're doing this the right way. We don't know. And we know you've done this a few times. So that's why we're bringing you in. And that's often the conversation that people have with me. It's like, hey, we're bringing you in because you've done this so many times. Like I think I had this recently where someone was like, hey, we have lots of smart people here. We just haven't done this 10 times, 100 times, right? I haven't done it 100 times, but 10 times, right? And so that's often kind of the difference. They're paying for that experience and for you to help them kind of see around the corners rather than maybe doing the actual work. So do you recommend an LLC, S Corp, or solo enterprise? I'm trying to remember what someone said. I remember seeing this in a video somewhere where it said like, hey, don't get legal until you make money. Look, S Corp eventually makes sense, but one, it costs money, right? And it's more expensive to do accounting wise. So if you're not making over, I don't know what the number should be, but probably at least over $20,000 a year of just side income on the consulting business, it's probably not worth it, right? Like the amount you're going to arbitrage in terms of like uh, business or tax write-offs and things like that for your LLC, it's going to be so minimal compared to the amount you're going to be spending on an accountant or someone to set up an LLC and an S corp and all of that stuff. It just makes more sense to do it solo, solo enterprise until again, like eventually, hey, if you're doing like $50,000, $100,000 more a year, yeah, I think it makes sense to set up an S corp. But I think you just hit the certain point. Let's see. Oh, I see. So you're saying like, so this was a continuation from the first one. How do you manage follow-up projects for existing clients if you already have a new project lined up? I mean, I'll often do multiple projects, so I don't think there's an issue there for me, but that's usually the balance. What are some common mistakes new consultants make when selling to clients? One of the common mistakes that I think a lot of people make, including myself, is you'll start negotiating against yourself before you even sell to the client. Right? You might be like already starting to be like, oh man, I don't know if they're gonna be able to afford my services. Like, will they say yes to the number I'm going to say? And I think just making sure you're very clear to yourself first that, your number is your number, whatever it is. If it's hours, if you're charging per hour, if you're charging per value, like don't move down on that initially. I like having, like when I propose a project, I like having like 3 options of possibilities that I can offer a client. So that way they kind of understand my pricing, but they can also like have a very cheap option. Like, hey, like if you just want me for X amount, this is all I can do. Like, this is what I'm willing to do for this amount. Like, I'm not going to work or do more than this. But that's what I'm willing to do. If not, here's what's a higher level and a higher level. So I think that's one thing. You don't start negotiating against yourself. Have a clear set of like offerings that you want to give to a person, and don't go down from that just because you feel like they're going to say no to something. I think that's a common mistake. Trying to think about other common mistakes that I like. Generally, scope obviously is an obvious one. Like people will try to scope too small. Kind of this is somewhat sometimes connected to the like costs, where like you're like, I don't want to come off as expensive, so I'll just put a smaller number initially. And the thing is, like if you're charging so little that you're unhappy, you'll either do worse work or be unhappy and do worse work. Like it just isn't a good result for anyone. So make sure you're putting a price that you would be happy with, even if it went over a little bit, because it might, right? Like it's too hard to perfectly estimate a project. Like make sure you're happy with the amount. Otherwise, if you're going to be unhappy or if you're just barely making enough to where you would be happy, you're going to be in a situation that's going to be frustrating. The client's not going to do anything. They're not going to know why you're upset, but you're going to be upset, and it's not a great way to go down. Will you be seen in an unfavorable light if your posts in your blog are about what you are learning and also what you want to be contracting consultant on? I definitely probably wouldn't reference if you're like learning on it, just because it probably would be like, okay, this person's just learning. You want to be the expert. People are paying you as a consultant to be the expert, not to be learning things. You will be learning things. That's part of it because there's so much to learn, but people don't want to pay you for that. So I'd recommend not referencing that. Can you share the 30-day checklist? I don't know where to find it. Oh, it's somewhere above, I think, but I'll link it again. Here it is. There you go. That's the checklist. So it should be pretty straightforward. Let me know if there's anything you can't use or find there. Kind of coming up on time here. Oh, here and here, it's just here. I mean, I can't make this clickable, but that is the link. Cool. Yeah, no, but hopefully this was helpful for everyone. It looks like questions are kind of rolling down a little bit, or calming down a little bit. So if that's everything for everyone, oh, here we go. Are there any sources available for free lead generation? I don't think anyone's going to give you free lead generation. I'm curious. Like a lot of people offer it. Like I would be very skeptical of free lead generation. Um, you know, you eventually need to kind of get your own, I guess. Free lead generation is just gonna be someone who's like scraped a bunch of emails that have nothing to do with what you're trying to sell. So you probably have to put some effort into getting leads. One way I've seen people go to Upwork and like pay to get like X amount. Like, hey, can you go find about like 100 people on LinkedIn with this title or something? So that's usually good. Cool. All right. Well, oh wait, let's see. Yes, I actually also like a lot of Alex Hormenzzi's information. But that's kind of good. Yeah, and maybe it's not. I don't know if you're looking for free leads here or just content on it, but yeah, Alex Hormenzzi has a lot of free content actually. On that probably. So he's solid. I like his way of like referencing offerings and things like that. Although I'm worried everyone's just gonna like have products in the future that are called like accelerators and things like that because that's like what he says. Like, oh yeah, develop an accelerator or do that. I'm like, everyone's just gonna have accelerators in the future because that's what you know. They're all reading the same stuff. But that means there'll be opportunities for other stuff in the future. So that's okay. Cool. Well, with that, I think I'm going to wrap this up. Seems like the questions are kind of calming down. Hopefully, you all have a good evening or good morning wherever you're at. I'll see you guys in the next live. I try to do these like once a month ish or so. Again, if you need more information, you can check out the TFA. But if not, there's plenty of content here for free. You can check out the 30-day checklist. And with that, guys, see you later.